Thank you for joining the CARP Nova Scotia event with Dr. Catherine Slater. We will begin in 7 minutes. We'd ask you to turn off your video so that only Dr. Slater will be on view when she's speaking. We'll open up the views at the end of the event if people want to ask questions. Please mute yourself and turn off your video. Thank you for joining the CARP Nova Scotia presentation with Dr. Catherine Slater. We will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you all for muting, and we'd appreciate it if you would also turn off your camera so that only Dr. Slater, when we begin, will be visible. Thank you for attending the CARP Nova Scotia webinar with Dr. Catherine Slater. Our presentation will begin in 4 minutes. In the meantime, would you please turn off your camera and mute yourselves? Most of you have muted. If you still have your cameras on, this will save the bandwidth, make it easier for us to hear and see Dr. Slater. We will come back online at the end of her presentation for questions. Thank you. Thank you for joining our CARP Nova Scotia webinar with Dr. Catherine Slater. We will begin the presentation in 3 minutes. We have a number of people joining, so we may delay a moment or two. When you're online, would you please mute yourself, which most of you have done, and also turn off your video so that we save bandwidth in order that everybody will be able to see Dr. Slater. At the end of the presentation, you can turn your videos back on to ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, well.
Our numbers are climbing very quickly. Thank you for attending the CARP Nova Scotia webinar with Dr. Kathy Slater. We'll begin in 2 minutes. Hopefully everybody will be on by then. We'd ask you when you come on to please mute yourself so that we can save bandwidth, and also please turn off your video if you can. It'll make it easier for everybody else to see Dr. Slater, who should be the only face on the video during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll get you to come back online for anyone who wants to ask questions. Thank you all for listening to our request that you be muted and turn off your videos. Having done videos like this across the country, I could tell you that Nova Scotians are much more agreeable than some people other parts of the country who refuse to mute themselves or turn off. Fortunately, we're just Atlantic Canadians tonight, as far as I know. We still have a few people joining, so I'm going to wait a moment or two, although it is right on 7 o'clock. Thank you for all of you who have attended and come online in time. We will not delay greatly waiting for other people. At CARP, we don't believe in making people wait who are on time for people who are late arriving. So we'll just give them another moment or so. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. We still have a number of people who are still coming online, but after our introduction, we'll be ready to go with Dr. Slater in just a couple of minutes. Stand by, please. Welcome to the CARP Nova Scotia webinar with Dr. Kathy Slater. We still have a number of people who are joining us, but we're going to start in just a moment. Would you please mute yourselves and also turn off your video if you can, so that we'll just see Dr. Slater when she begins to present. All right, I think we're ready to begin. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Van Gorder. I'm the past chair of CARP Nova Scotia and currently acting as the National Director of Policy for CARP and the Chief Operating Officer. Yes, out of retirement once again, but it's only the fourth time since I thought I was retiring 15 years ago. So I guess it's what I do. It's really good to have so many people with us this evening. I know this is an important topic for everyone, and we're very pleased that all of you will be able to enjoy it tonight. Dr. Kathy Slater will be explaining and exploring the importance of vaccinations in older adults. For those of you who don't know Dr. Slater, who has presented to us before, she's an assistant professor with the Faculty of Medicine and the Division of Infectious Diseases at Dalhousie University. She's also a clinical pharmacy specialist in infectious diseases and antimicrobial stewardship at the IWK Health Center. She's a clinical scientist with the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology and the Canadian Immunization Research Network. She, of course, is an avid researcher and has published extensively. So we know that we're going to be hearing from one of the recognized experts in Canada on this topic. I'm not going to say any more than that because I think that it's very clear that we've got the person that we want to have talking to us tonight. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Slater and suggest that you put your screens on presenter view, and then you'll be able to see just Dr. Slater in your full screen. Dr. Kathy Slater. Dr. Slater?
Thank you so much, Bill, for the wonderful introduction, and good evening to everybody in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland. It's my understanding that we have several provinces represented tonight. So I'm going to start to share my screen. So just one moment. Bill, I think I need permission just to make me a co-host, just so I can start sharing my screen.
Yes, you do. I apologize
No,
for not.
I do it all the time with my students, all the time.
Just a moment, and I'll do that. Oh. There you are. Now you should be able to share your screen.
That's excellent. Now I just need to find my, sorry, just one moment.
There it comes.
That's not what you want to see. Just hold on. I'm just trying to find, just give me one moment. Okay, my apologies.
That's fine. We did see the share though, so at least.
Yeah, it just wasn't the right item to share.
It's all right. There are more people who are joining us all the time, so we're just adding more for when you start. This is where we need a little music in the background, but I promise you, I will not sing.
Sorry about this, Bill. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, so just give me a moment, okay? I do apologize.
Okay. Your screen did share for a moment there.
Yeah, it was the wrong screen though. That was the only problem, so I'm not sure exactly what's happening. Just bear with me. I'm just going to turn my video off just for one moment, okay?
Fine. Yes. Technology is wonderful, but just think a year ago how many of us would not have known how to do this at all. There it is.
Yeah, I'm going to blame it on my teenagers.
I'm sure that's it. Yeah, we're lucky we didn't come up on a game site.
Sorry. Yeah,
All right.
there was too many windows open, so I sincerely apologize. Once again, good evening, everyone. So our plan this evening is hopefully that we'll have lots of times for questions and answers, and I can see all of you again. But what we're going to do is just walk through just a little bit of an update on adult vaccination. And of course, it's during a very special and very unique time during the COVID-19 pandemic. What I would like to do, and we will get to the COVID-19 vaccine, is to talk a little bit about some other vaccines that are very important for vaccination in older adults. And that would be shingles vaccine, influenza vaccine, which I'm sure most of you have all had by now, whooping cough vaccine, the pneumonia vaccine, and then we'll talk about the COVID-19 vaccine. And I'm more than welcome, if folks can send their, if they have questions throughout and they just want to jot them down, or you can also put them through the chat function and then Bill can read them out to me at the end, or you can just save your questions for the end and we can do everything live, whatever you prefer. So with regards to shingles, if you were able to look at the person sitting next to you, 1 out of 3 of you could experience an episode of shingles in your lifetime. And if you're over 80, it's actually 1 out of 2 of you will experience shingles. So it's pretty much a given that this is something that we're all going to develop. Complications can affect a patient's quality of life. So you can develop acute pain, and that's just from the shingles itself. And then there's some other bad things that can happen, something called PHN, or post-herpetic neuralgia, which can be very, very painful. And it's sort of long-standing, a neuropathic type of pain. There can be eye complications, such as we see in this picture here, scarring, bacterial infections. And this virus is kind of like the influenza virus, and it's also very much like the COVID virus in that it causes lots of inflammation. So in an effect can also lead to stroke. Excuse me. When we look at, there's a special committee in Canada, and the short name for it is called NACI, or the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. And they essentially tell us as immunizers what we should be offering to patients. And so NACI says that every adult over 50 should have 2 doses of the Shingrex vaccine. And that's recommended to prevent the shingles and then all the badness that comes along with shingles as well. So that's one vaccine. And it's really based upon this information and what is called VE, or vaccine efficacy. As you can see, this vaccine works very, very well, regardless of which age group that you belong to. So even for folks who are over 70 or over 80 years of age, the vaccine is very, very effective. So the good news too with Shingrex is that, and it can be given with other vaccines. So it can be given with seasonal influenza vaccine, for instance. It can be given with the pneumonia vaccine that we're going to talk about. And it can be given also with the whooping cough or the pertussis vaccine that we're going to talk about as well. So again, it's 2 doses, 2 to 6 months apart. So a common question that we're hearing now because of COVID, and folks aren't either able to access healthcare, or they're just wanting to stay home more, is if it's been 7 months since my first dose of shingles vaccine, do I need to restart the series? And the answer is absolutely no. We never ever restart the series with a vaccination. So if you've only had 1 dose of Shingrex, for instance, it's never too late to get your second dose. It just means that you won't have long-term immunity and long-term protection. So whenever it's feasible that you're able to get your second dose, it's never too late. So this is a very common A common question that even healthcare professionals have, and they think that sometimes if it's been a very long period of time that you have to restart the series, but that is absolutely incorrect. So you just kind of continue on from where you left off, even if it's been longer than the 2 to 6 months, or even if it's been longer than 12 months, that's still acceptable. So that's one vaccine and vaccine preventable disease, shingles. And now we'll kind of switch gears and talk about influenza. So, and I want to specifically focus on influenza and older adults. So as we get older, our immune system also gets older, and we get a little bit of a weakening of our immune system, even if we stay very healthy and active. And so this puts us at risk for flu-related complications. And when I say flu, I mean influenza. And if we look at this diagram, you can see that, and Bill can probably help me out with this if this statistic is incorrect, but about 15% of the Canadian population is over 65. But if you look at the hospitalizations related to influenza, 70% of them are for folks over 65, and they account for 91% of the deaths. So there's really a disproportionate sort of showing with regards to having older adults that have all of the badness associated with influenza, some of the same things that we're now seeing with COVID. And I know this looks very busy, but what I just wanted to illustrate is that we tend to think of influenza causing pneumonia, which can be very severe. But the other thing that influenza can do is that it can be a trigger. So for folks that have heart disease, or if they've had previous sort of mini strokes before, or if they have high blood pressure or kidney disease or diabetes, what can happen when someone gets influenza, again, much like COVID, is it can tip you over, if you will, and cause an exacerbation of that disorder. And that in itself can result in hospitalization. Excuse me. So if we look at, again, for folks over 65, there's a higher influenza attributable death if you have one of these chronic conditions. So if you have heart disease, you're 5 times more likely to die from influenza than from someone who does not. If you have lung disease, you're 12 times more likely to unfortunately die of influenza. And if you have both, it's 20 times. So we know that we also see these chronic conditions more so in folks over 65 as well. And then some people might think, well, you know, if I, so obviously death from influenza is very, very troubling, but so is hospitalization as well, because we know that when older individuals do get hospitalized, the whole usual aging process it really, really speeds up. And what I mean by that is that you can become immobile, so that patients can have accelerated bone loss. They can essentially have functional decline, and this can lead to disability and dependence. So having influenza, whether it causes pneumonia or whether it causes an exacerbation of another chronic condition, can end up in hospitalization. And just being hospitalized can really lead to long-lasting functional decline. And that's something else that we want to prevent by offering influenza vaccine. So again, especially during COVID, it's more important than ever to reduce the spread of influenza, just as we're trying to reduce the spread of COVID. Something that we found out, and I'll sort of walk you through this graph. This looks at how well the influenza vaccine works, how effective it is. And these are just some different flu years. So you don't really have to worry about these. What is important to know is this is folks over 65 and this is younger individuals. And so we can see that the vaccine is not as effective in folks that are over 65. And this is the regular, what we call in most provinces, the publicly funded flu vaccine. So we want to be able to somehow close that gap, have a vaccine that is as effective in folks over 65 as we see in younger individuals. So NACI, remember that's that committee that tells us what we should be offering patients, says that all folks that are over 65 years of age should receive high-dose Fluzone. And you've all heard about this in the media. It should be used over the standard dose flu vaccine. So that's the flu vaccine that's being offered by public health right now. So still a very good vaccine, but high dose Fluzone is much, much, much more effective in folks who are over 65 years of age. So this is a recommendation from NACI. And just because NACI makes a recommendation doesn't mean that provinces will follow suit and then fund that recommendation. So high-dose Fluzone is simply 4 times the amount of vaccine that we find in regular flu vaccine. So it has 4 times the amount. And when we look at side effects, it has very similar side effects as we would see with regular flu vaccine. Sometimes there's a little bit more pain associated with it when you compare it to regular flu vaccine, but you get the same amount of redness and swelling as you would from the regular flu shot. And as far as what we call systemic reactions, so this could be having aches and pains, feeling tired, having headache and fever. Again, the same, there's no difference with regards to these reactions if a patient wants to get the high dose Fluzone or if they were to get regular dose. And this is something that we don't often see. Usually when we give more of something, we tend to have a lot more side effects, and that's not the case at all, but we get a whole lot more efficacy. It just works so much better in older individuals. So if we look at, and I'll show you how things have changed a little bit, but if we look at funding, so again, all children's vaccines are funded, and it always comes down to, I find it very interesting that when we're told that these are the best vaccines, for instance, for folks over 65 or for folks over 50, there isn't sort of an automatic mechanism that they are publicly funded, which is very unfortunate. What has happened in Canada is certain provinces, their long-term care facilities in these provinces went out and provided provincial funding to have this vaccine available in their long-term care facilities. But as everybody knows, the federal government is now paying for this vaccine to be used in all long-term care facilities. So all nursing homes is being paid for by the federal government. 2 provinces have gone a little bit further, and they now fund this vaccine. So anybody over 65 in Ontario and anybody over 65 in PEI who's out in the community also has this vaccine paid for them as well. So Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, what I've said is that especially Nova Scotia and New Brunswick that previously put money into having it in the long-term care facilities didn't have to pay for that this year because the federal government did, and they could perhaps use that money to pay for the vaccine for folks out in the community next year, but we'll wait to see if that happens. But there's a man who's on a mission, and that's Bill. And I think I've never seen such a wonderful advocate for vaccine preventable diseases than this man. He's worked tirelessly to convince, government, policymakers, folks that pay for things to have this vaccine funded. I'm very hopeful that next year, but I say that every year, that I think it's so important that that this is something that we put money into to protect our older adults. And certainly there's been lots in the media about this vaccine, and specifically also how short it was. My mom, of course, I think she was probably the first person in the province of Nova Scotia to get the vaccine, because I had her starting to get everything set up in August, because only so much vaccine was actually being distributed. And given the fact that Ontario and PEI are able to offer it to all of their folks over 65, there was a shortage, of course, even if you were able to pay for the vaccine, a lot of folks weren't able to get it. So just very quickly, a couple other vaccine preventable diseases. So one is whooping cough, and the other name that we use for that is pertussis. So whooping cough is a disease that we tend to really worry about in little ones. So you're probably thinking, well, why do I need to get a vaccine if this is a baby illness? And it's not a baby illness. We can all get whooping cough, but what we want to do is to cocoon these babies. And what that means is that for every pregnancy, mom will get the whooping cough vaccine. So with every single pregnancy. Dad should receive the vaccine, one booster in the lifetime, and grandmothers and grandfathers and great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers, anybody who's going to be around that baby should make sure that they've had once in a lifetime booster so they don't inadvertently give whooping cough to this baby, because it actually kills babies. So we like to recommend, it kind of goes along with the tetanus vaccine. It's called tetanus and pertussis, or tetanus and whooping cough, that you've received one of these in your lifetime in adulthood, and again to prevent passing that on to little ones. And last year, for instance, there was an outbreak of whooping cough in New Brunswick. And then the final vaccine before we move on to COVID is the vaccine that prevents what's called pneumococcal pneumonia. And it can cause pneumonia or lung infections. And it's spread just the same way that everything else seems to be spread these days. So just through close contact. And folks that are at risk is anybody who's over 65 years and older. So there's lots of other risk factors that folks may have fulfilled. But just for this evening, if you're over 65, you should receive the pneumonia vaccine. So that should be being offered to you. So again, if you wanted to make a little list, there's the shingles vaccine, the whooping cough vaccine, influenza, and then the pneumonia vaccine if you're over 65. You can get it when you're younger than 65 if you have some other comorbidities like heart disease or diabetes, for instance. But just for everybody to remember that if you're over 65, you should have one shot of the pneumonia vaccine. And again, this is a recommendation from NACI that all adults over 65 should receive a pneumonia vaccine. Okay, so now we can move on to probably what folks have been we've been inundated with information, and we've been doing this for how long now? Has this been 9 months, I think? Learning how to live with SARS-CoV-2, or COVID-19 as it's called. So what we do know is that there's a global COVID-19 pandemic for sure. There's a high infection rate. There's now 62 million people globally that are infected or have been infected with COVID. There's been many deaths. So, and specifically in the United States and in other countries where the death rate has been extremely high. Many people are still at risk. And unfortunately, we're seeing a second wave, even in our very coveted, protected what used to be our Atlantic bubble and Atlantic provinces. And there really is no effective treatments available. We hear lots of things in the news, especially with this gentleman. There are some, but there's sort of no magic bullet. Essentially, the main thing is to use steroids in patients who are really, really sick. So we need just not one vaccine, but we need many vaccines. And I'll just show you, this is a little cartoon of the COVID-19, sort of what it would look like. And it has all these special little things on it, all these little proteins. And this is what the scientists went after when they were trying to develop a vaccine, to look at different things that they could target. So when we look at the development of vaccine, and we've been hearing even more information even today, there was a national announcement about vaccine, but how close are we to the COVID-19 vaccine? And I just thought I'd take a moment just to talk briefly about kind of the process that normally happens when a vaccine is developed. So normally, vaccine development takes decades. So they do testing in animals. This is called the preclinical stage. Then they do testing in humans, where they're mainly looking at safety. So those trials have been completed for many, many vaccines. Then they also look at more people, and they look at safety, but they also look to see how well the body makes an immune response to that vaccine. And then finally, what has just happened with many of the vaccines is they also look at something called efficacy. How well does it actually work? And normally this can take decades for this to happen, to put all this information together. And this is just a little snapshot or a cartoon that was taken from the New York Times, basically saying that if the vaccine development was kind of at what we would call the normal rate, we would have a vaccine by May 2036. So obviously that's not the case. There's been some very, very smart people who have been rapidly working on developing vaccinations. And in Canada, we're in very good shape. And we're in very good shape because what we did is we didn't put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. Canada has signed contracts with 7 different companies to procure vaccine, which is very smart because, as I said, we don't need one vaccine, we need many vaccines. And that's to ensure that globally, all over the world, that we're able to immunize everyone who wants the vaccine. And what's very nice is that we are very much ahead of the line with the vaccines that you've been hearing about in the news, the Moderna vaccine, as well as the Pfizer vaccine. AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine has also just released their what is called their phase 3 information, which tells us that the vaccine also works very well. And what is important is that we're well positioned in Canada to receive at least, a significant amount of vaccine for vulnerable populations. And this looks very busy, so I'm just going to walk you through just a little bit of it, or just one piece of it. This actually came from that committee that I talked about before, NACI. And NACI has developed a plan who gets vaccine first. And the folks that get vaccine first are, and what is the definition here is advanced age. And so there's going to be a very strict rollout for the vaccine. Again, per province, looking at equity, feasibility, and acceptability, of course. So there needs to be an adequate supply, but the main folks being targeted is going to be advanced age, as well as folks that where infection could cause disproportionate consequences. So these would be remote Indigenous communities, for instance, and then there will be rollout after that. But it's very, very nice to see that, at least in my opinion, the population most at risk, which is older individuals, will be first in line to actually receive the vaccine. So that was very quick, but we're going to have lots of time for questions if folks do have them. So just in summary, so the one disease that we can prevent right now is influenza. So hopefully you've all received your flu shot. Even if you weren't able to get the high-dose flu vaccine, it's a very, very, the publicly funded flu vaccine still gives you protection. It's just not as good, but it still gives you protection and can do something that we call attenuate disease. So even if it doesn't work 100%, if you were to get influenza, it can actually make the infection much milder just by having the flu shot. So very important. We know that, again, the immune system weakens with age, but there is a specifically designed vaccine to help create a stronger immune response, and that's the high-dose Fluzone. So in summary, it's very important to optimize all adult immunizations. I know it's very hard to get to care providers right now, but if you had to choose at this moment, I would say influenza and the pneumonia vaccine, but especially influenza. We do recommend, excuse me, that if you're able to get all vaccines in one setting, that's a good idea too, because then you're not having to access healthcare as much, so not putting yourself at risk for a potential exposure. I think, however, though, in the Atlantic provinces, I know things have been ramping up, but accessing healthcare is a very, very safe thing to do. The hospitals are very safe, and the physicians' offices are very safe, and the pharmacies are very safe. So again, I'll just leave it with that. The best thing that we can do is to prevent a disease from happening in the first place. So everything that we can do to reduce our risk for infectious diseases.
Thank you very much, Dr. Slater. That was excellent. There are a number of questions, so I'm going to go through the ones that are on the chat
Sure.
first and read them to you, and then we can take questions from the floor. I do want to mention to the group, because this is very important to CARP at the moment, we are now looking at or not now, we have for some time been trying to get the provincial governments in Atlantic Canada, other than PEI, who have already done it, to have the high dose flu vaccine available for all at-risk adults, whether they live inside or outside long-term care. As you probably know, it's now available to everybody in long-term care, but not to those of us, the 90% of older adults who are not in long-term care. We were planning a campaign, which we've been carrying out all fall, to encourage the government to make that decision for next year. We just found out on the weekend that the decisions I've been asked by the National Ordering Authority, that information come from the provinces by December 4th, which is the end of this week. That's way earlier than usual. It usually happens in March. So I would ask all of you, if after hearing Dr. Slater tonight, you are concerned about not having the high dose flu vaccine for all of us who should be getting it, that you get in touch with your local member of the legislature. A lot of them don't even know this yet. They don't understand. We've written to the Premier and to Dr. Strang once again. We know that they're very concerned and busy with COVID, but we really believe that having that high dose vaccine available to everybody, it must be good, it must be working. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it in the long-term care homes.
Oh,
So why,
right.
so why isn't it available to everyone? If you'd like more information on that, go to our website or get in touch with me by email. I'll be glad to give you other information. That's the only commercial you'll get from me tonight. The questions. First of all, my husband and I had shingles vaccine several years ago when it was given as a single dose. Is it necessary for us now to get the 2-dose vaccine?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So unfortunately, it is a recommendation to get immunized with this Shingrex vaccine now. And I know that's really hard for some individuals because it is very expensive. You spent a lot of money on the Zostavax. That was the older vaccine, the single dose, and now to have to spend more money. I guess what we found out is that with the older shingles vaccine, the Zostavax, is that it was the best vaccine that we had at the time. But unfortunately, what we saw is that the immunity, you were protected for a very short period of time, and then that whole immunity kind of dropped off. And so people were vulnerable again to get shingles. We don't see that at all with Shingrex. There's actual data out now to 15 years looking at very robust antibody responses. So it's an official recommendation. I keep talking about this committee, NACI. NACI officially recommends that if you've received the Zostavax, the old shingles vaccine, that you get re-immunized with Shingrex as long as it's been at least a year.
Right. Good, thank you. Next question. Did the effect of the influenza vaccine among those 65 plus account for the chronic conditions?
So can you repeat that again, Bill?
Yeah, did the effect of the influenza vaccine among those 65 plus account for chronic conditions?
Oh, excellent question. Excellent question. So it did. So but again, it would kind of be in the same in the other group. But what we do, like in the younger age group, but that's an excellent point. But we do see higher rates of what we call these comorbidities or other disease states in folks that are over 65 years of age. But that's an excellent point. Yes.
Good. Next question. I have already had the regular flu shot because the high dose was unavailable. If the high dose becomes available later in the season, should I get that also?
That's an excellent question. And I've heard this asked, and this happened to my mom last year because, as we know, the high dose flu vaccine was nowhere to be found last year. So she's had it every other year. And I just said, go get your flu vaccine. So the official answer would be no. Just because there's no official recommendation to say to do that. And that's really all that I can say. Offline, I might say something else, but I would need to say that. Unfortunately, there is no high dose flu zone left anywhere. So that wouldn't be a concern.
Okay, the next question is how much does the Shingrex shingles vaccine cost? It's not, of course, covered by the province at the moment.
Yeah, of course not. I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to guess, and I think it is about
300.
yeah. So and I was going to say I don't want to I'm not going to talk about any specific drugstores, but I know that there's one that it's one sort of place that you can go that it is a bit cheaper to go. It's big. I think everybody knows what I mean without me saying it. So um, that because things like this can be very, very cost prohibitive. It's very expensive to have to be, um, having to uh, uh, pay that amount of money. And, when we have other expenses that we need to make. So if you, there is one pharmacy that it is a bit cheaper at, but uh, yeah.
Yeah, it does. And of course, that is another of the vaccines that CARP is advocating very heavily that it also be covered. And anybody who has had the shingles or knows someone who has know how terrible it can be. And we believe the cost savings of the province covering it rather than treating people who get shingles after would more than make up the extra cost of the Shingrex.
Absolutely, Bill. And I just want to comment, I completely agree. And though that sort of studying has been done to show that it's cost effective and other provinces do fund it. They don't fund it for over 50, but they fund it for over 65.
Right. Next question. Can you get the pneumonia vaccine, the pneumococcal vaccine, at a pharmacy?
Yeah, so that's unfortunate. So you can't. And the reason for that, so a pharmacist could write out the prescription, so they could prescribe it for you, they could inject it, but then they would need to charge you for it. So they would never do that to you because unfortunately, public health does not distribute the vaccine to pharmacies. This has been something, and we've been looking at just like tetanus vaccine or the whooping cough vaccine. Many other provinces, the pharmacists have access to what we call the public health, the publicly funded supply. So pharmacists in Nova Scotia, I'm not, I'm not sure about Newfoundland or even New Brunswick actually. So I apologize, don't have access to the publicly funded supply. So it wouldn't make sense because then you'd have to pay for it. So
Right.
you would have to go to your family doctor or nurse practitioner to receive it.
All right. Thank you. Another question. Can Dr. Slater explain the different types of COVID vaccines, i.e. RNA, embryonic cells, and the need to be kept at a very low temperature, et cetera?
Wow, I'm so impressed. Someone who's much smarter than me could probably do that. But you're absolutely correct. So the two sort of front runner vaccines are called mRNA vaccines. And for any of us, if you remember biology back in high school, so the mRNA kind of helps our body make these little proteins so that we can fight off the COVID. What's really interesting is that, so for the Pfizer vaccine, it does need to be kept at these super, super, super cold temperatures, minus 70 to minus 80. And it was thought, and I haven't heard anything different about that vaccine. It was thought Moderna's vaccine had to be kept that cold, but there's new information now that for a very long period of time, it can be kept at minus 20, and that's kind of sort of like normal freezer temperature, and is also stable in the fridge for, I've heard, up to 30 days. So this is really going to help a lot logistically, and we do have a contract with Moderna as well. So as far as distributing the vaccine and storage, so that's kind of reassuring. We'll see if Pfizer comes back out with some different recommendations with regards to storage and transportation of their vaccine as well.
Right. Next question. I know the flu vaccine is needed annually, but which of these vaccines are only needed once and which do you need to repeat regularly?
Oh, excellent question. Whoever had that question. So you're absolutely right. Flu vaccine is every year. But the other ones are, as of right now, they're one-time vaccines. So over 65, one dose of pneumonia vaccine. Over 50, one series of shingles vaccine. So that's two doses, and then you're done. And then one lifetime dose of whooping cough, or it's tetanus and whooping cough vaccine. So excellent question.
Yes, and we do have our friend Cecilia from New Brunswick is with us tonight, and she wanted us to know that the Coalition for Seniors in New Brunswick is rolling out a campaign also this week to the public and the provincial government on the importance of ordering the vaccines for 2021 for all older adults over 65. And good for you, and CARP will be there with you, encouraging the New Brunswick government to do that also. And the chair of the Health Advocacy Committee for CARP Nova Scotia tells us that last year the cost was just over $300 for the Shingrex vaccines.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Uh, Next question. Who identifies high-risk seniors? Do we self-identify, or should our family doctor put us on the list? I'm going to tell you how CARP does this at our advocacy, and then Dr. Slater can tell us if we're right. But we say at-risk seniors, and we talk about using the frailty scale, which most doctors are familiar with now. So it should be easy for your physician to know, using the frailty scale, where you rate and whether or not you're at high risk and should be getting the vaccine. Would you support that, Dr. Slater?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm certainly no expert in the area. And I'll just go back to this slide. I think I'm still screen sharing.
Yes.
Just let me see. Um, so again, they just say advanced age, and but again, there's experts that are kind of breaking those things down. So I really don't have any further information if they're going to be getting that specific, or if they're going to say yes, everybody in long-term care and everybody over 65 who are community dwelling. Um, you know, logistically, I'm not sure if there will be any more breakdown,
Okay.
with regards to who is going to be prioritized.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Next question. I heard there was a different flu shot if you're allergic to eggs. Is this true?
So, um, so if you're allergic to eggs, all flu vaccines except for one, which I'll talk about, are egg based. But there's such a small amount of egg protein. It's called ovoalbumin. It's a teeny amount. So years ago, we would tell people, if you have an egg allergy, you can't get flu vaccine. And that was many years ago. And that's all since changed. So there's absolutely no concern or contraindication now to getting any flu vaccine if you have an egg allergy. The only contraindication to getting flu vaccine is if you've actually had a reaction to that vaccine before. So there is another vaccine that recently came onto the market called Flucelvax. But I think I don't know. I think it must be being marketed or something for that reason, which is not, and it's not actually grown it's not grown in chicken eggs. So there's no worry there, but there really is no worry anymore with other flu vaccine either.
Good. Thank you. Next question. Is there a population that will not be able to get the COVID vaccine, i.e. cancer patients?
Oh no, cancer patients will want them to get the vaccine because they're immunocompromised or their immune system is suppressed. That would put them possibly at more risk for having severe outcomes with COVID. Possibly. Again, we're still gathering the data on who is specifically at risk, but that would not be a contraindication because these vaccines, they're not live vaccines. They're vaccines that won't replicate in your body. So it would actually be important, much like we always offer flu vaccine to patients who have cancer, for instance.
Good. Thank you. Next question. How do I get the vaccines like pneumonia vaccine if I don't have a family doctor?
Oh, I'm so very sorry to hear that. Um, what I would do And this would have to be something that public health would be able to help out. But right now, probably until April, roll of the vaccine for the COVID vaccine is supposed to start within the first 3 months, over the first 3 months in 2021. So public health, right now, it's all hands on deck. They're so busy, but that certainly is another avenue to get the pneumonia vaccine. And I'm very sorry to hear that you don't have a family doctor. That's very difficult.
Certainly is. There's still
I mean, a walk-in, it's possible that a walk-in clinic would have a supply because they could give it to you for free if they have the supply.
if we do have some contact with walk-in clinics. So Jim, if you'd like to send me an email, I can double check for you with a couple of clinics we have contact with to see if they might be able to do that for you. Pat wants to know if the COVID-19 vaccine will need to be administered every year or just once.
I have no idea. I don't know. And what we do know is that it is 2 doses, at least, for what we know for the vaccines that are coming, the frontliners. So what that means is after your first dose, you're not going to be protected for 6 weeks because you need your first dose. 4 weeks later, you'll get your second dose. I think the Pfizer one says 3 weeks. And then you have to wait 2 more weeks so that you get that nice immune response. Whether we're going to need to do this every year, I don't know if anybody can answer that question. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see.
Okay. Fine. Another question. Not having had chicken pox, do I need the shingles shot?
Yeah. So sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Bill. You finish.
There was a second question all in
Okay.
One. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is a really, really common question. And what we say is that even if you don't remember having chicken pox, you most likely, anybody who's over 50 years of age in Canada, would have had at least some sort of exposure to chicken pox throughout the years. And they might have developed what we call it's called a subclinical disease. So you didn't have kind of full-blown chicken pox, but you probably were exposed enough. So we say, regardless of your history, whether you can remember having it, we still say that you should be immunized with Shingrex.
Okay, and the second part of that question, the COVID-19 and egg allergy, is that the same answer as the flu, or is there an issue with egg allergy and some of the COVID-19 vaccines?
Yeah, there's not an issue with egg allergy because that's not how they're actually made.
Okay. And there's some conversation back and forth to help our one person find some place to get his vaccines. It doesn't have a doctor. So that's all the written questions. Oops, sorry. All of a sudden there's a couple more in quickly. As the COVID vaccine has been rushed to market, what are some of the possible problems?
Yeah, I wouldn't say rushed. I would say that there was a wonderful, and I apologize, but I would say that there was this really all hands on deck facilitation, doing something that we never thought that we could do before. I don't think that the Canadian government, or even I know we even the FDA, which is the equivalent of Health Canada, would ever approve a vaccine that didn't fit all the criteria that we would need to say that a vaccine is safe. So it's been studied in tens of thousands of individuals, all different age groups. So at this point, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. And I feel confident in the really, really smart scientists and folks that are overseeing all this and looking at safety. And I completely trust them that they would never sort of rush if there was information that we didn't have, that the vaccine would not come to market.
Very good. All right, that's all the questions that we have. So is there someone who would like to unmute and ask a question? We'll ask people. We could just take our time. Anybody with it?
I have a question.
Yes,
You hear me?
please.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. If I was to get 2 or 3 of these vaccines at once, so I've never had any of them, would I get them all from my doctor at the same time? And if I did, would I get all these negative reactions from all of them at the same time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the vaccines could all be given certainly by your family doctor. The tetanus pertussis vaccine, certainly, and the pneumonia vaccine. The pharmacist would be able to give you the flu vaccine as well as the Shingrex vaccine. There is no concern at all in receiving all of the vaccines at the same time. And in fact, we usually encourage that because it's one visit, and this is even before COVID. They don't interfere with one another, and you don't have any more side effects. And when you think about it, that's what we do with babies. When babies get their vaccines, we put 7 different types of vaccine kind of all in one. And so even though it's one shot, there's seven different things in there. So to protect against 7 different vaccine preventable diseases. So it's an excellent question and a very common question, but they all work together very nicely, and there's no harm in doing that, and lots of benefit.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there another question? Well, I think we did very well on the questions. That people were good about using the chat. That's a much better way to do it. I do want everyone to know that we have recorded this this webinar, and it will be available online on the CARP website. All of you who signed up for the webinar, all of you will get an email with the link to that when our webmaster, our volunteer webmaster gets it up, and it'll be available for you or your friends, anyone else in your family who didn't see it. So I want to thank Dr. Slater very, very much. Wonderful to have you with us again. Say hi to your mom for me. I'm in contact with her quite regularly.
I didn't tell my mom about this tonight. I'm going to be in so much trouble.
You're going to enjoy. Well, I could always help her look at a recording on her iPad if she wants to do it. And also thank you for the technical help and background help from Ron Swan, the chair of the Nova Scotia chapter, and our mutual friend Terry, who helped us put this whole thing together. So thank you all very, very much. Please watch carefully. There'll be another CARP webinar in a couple of weeks. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you, Dr. Slater.
Thanks, Des.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.